A waitress spotted what doctors missed and saved a vampire's son's life in minutes. Inside the small diner at the corner of Raven Street, the smell of coffee and fresh bread offered a comforting warmth, a quiet contrast to the storm outside. Ilara wiped a table, humming softly to herself. She had worked at the diner for nearly 5 years, but she never felt bored. Something about the rhythm of serving coffee, taking orders, and watching the world go by made her feel connected. She noticed things others missed: the slight tremor of a hand, the faintest hint of exhaustion in a customer's eyes. It was a gift, or perhaps a curse. Tonight, her attention was caught by a man and a boy entering the diner. The man was tall, elegant, and pale, dressed in a long coat that brushed the floor. His eyes were dark, deep as night, and they scanned the room with quiet authority. Behind him, the boy clutched his father's hand, pale and fragile, barely lifting his gaze from the floor. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. There was something wrong with the boy, not ordinary sickness wrong, something else, something she couldn't name. She had learned to trust these instincts. "Can I help you?" she asked, approaching them with a cautious smile. The man's gaze met hers. His presence was commanding, yet there was a shadow of uncertainty in his eyes. "We need a place to rest," he said, his voice smooth, almost melodic. "My son is unwell." Ilara's eyes fell on the boy. He was pale as porcelain, shivering slightly despite the warmth of the diner. She knelt down beside him, her hands hovering just above his. "You're very weak," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "Can you tell me what hurts?" The boy's lips trembled and he shook his head. His pulse was faint, almost fading. Ilara's stomach clenched. She had seen this before, not in hospitals or clinics, but in the quiet moments when life hung by a thread. Something important had been missed. "I can help," she whispered, "but we need to act fast." The man's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded, though there was no anger in his tone, only curiosity and a hint of fear. "My name is Ilara. I work here. I can help your son," she said, her voice steady despite the tension curling in her chest. The man hesitated, studying her. After a long moment, he nodded. "Do as you must. His name is Lysander." Ilara felt a shiver run through her. Lysander. The name sounded old, almost forgotten, like a word from a storybook whispered in the wrong century. She reached for a small satchel she kept behind the counter, a habit of preparedness she had picked up over the years. Inside were herbs, a few tinctures and remedies she had learned from her grandmother, who had been known in their town as someone who saw the unseen. She worked quickly, mixing herbs into a paste and placing it on Lysander's wrists and temples. She murmured soft, comforting words, guiding him to breathe slowly, to focus on her voice. The boy's pulse flickered under her fingers, faint but steady, a tiny spark in the darkness. The man watched her silently, his expression unreadable. Every so often his eyes flicked to his son, as if fearing the worst. But there was also something else in his gaze: admiration, even awe, though he did not understand why. Minutes passed like hours. The diner around them continued its usual rhythm: clinking plates, muted conversations, the hiss of coffee machines. But Ilara felt nothing but the fragile life in her hands. Finally, Lysander's eyes fluttered open, hazel and wide, filled with a fragile trust. "Thank you," she whispered. The man's voice broke the silence, soft yet weighted. "You've done what no doctor could. You've saved him." Ilara looked up. He was watching her closely now, not just observing, but measuring something she could not name. There was a power in him, ancient and dark, and yet he seemed human in a way that surprised her. "My instincts," she said simply. "I just saw it." The boy's small hand reached for hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice weak but clear. Ilara squeezed it gently, smiling. But the relief was short-lived. As she glanced at the boy, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Something stirred in the air, a presence, a shadow almost alive, brushing against the edges of the diner. Lysander's pulse faltered for a moment, weaker than before. The man noticed it too. His eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "He's reacting," he murmured, his voice tight with worry. "The curse, it is stronger than I feared." Alara froze. Curse. The word landed in her chest like a stone. She had heard of curses, old family legends and whispers in the wind, but she had never encountered one so real, so immediate. She looked at Lysander, lying pale and trembling, and realized the truth. This boy was caught between life and something far darker. "I can help," she said again, her voice firmer now, "but I need you to trust me completely." The man hesitated, his jaw tight. "I trust few," he said finally, and then with emotion almost imperceptible he lowered his defenses. "Do what you must." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She began again, carefully, speaking words her grandmother had taught her long ago, words meant to soothe the body and mind, to awaken the inner spark of life even in the shadow of death. She placed her hands gently on the boy's chest, feeling the faint rhythm of his heart, and whispered encouragements to it, guiding it back from the brink. Minutes stretched. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the diner windows like impatient fingers. Patrons glanced nervously, sensing something extraordinary in the air though they could not name it. Then, slowly, Lysander's pulse strengthened. His eyelids lifted and his breathing steadied. A fragile smile appeared on his lips, and Alara felt a surge of relief that almost knocked the breath from her lungs. The man's eyes softened as he watched his son. "How?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Alara shook her head. "I just saw what was wrong." Sometimes you don't need tests or machines, you just need to notice. He studied her, and for the first time he allowed a faint smile. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. "I am Kaelin, Lysander's father." Alara met his gaze. Kaelin. Another name that carried the weight of something old, something regal. She could feel it in him. The power, the history, the burdens of a life lived long and carefully. And yet there was vulnerability there too, buried beneath the shadow of authority. Before she could speak, Lysander reached for Kaelin, pulling him closer. "I'm okay now," the boy said, his voice small but steady. "She saved me." Kaelin placed a hand on Lysander's shoulder, his eyes never leaving Alara. There was an intensity there, a storm of emotions, gratitude, or something unspoken that chilled and intrigued her at the same time. Then, without warning, Lysander's body shuddered. His pulse faltered again, weaker this time. Panic flashed across Kaelin's face, and Alara's stomach tightened. "The curse," Kaelin whispered, voice tight with fear. "It's awakening." Alara's heart pounded. She had dealt with weak hearts, faint pulses, and mysterious illnesses. But this was beyond anything she had ever faced. The boy's life was fragile, hanging between moments of breath and darkness, and the shadow that Kaelin spoke of seemed to grow heavier in the room, pressing against the walls like smoke. "I can help," she said, her voice low but steady. She knelt beside Lysander again, placing her hands on his chest. "You have to fight with me, Lysander. You're stronger than the curse." Kaelin watched silently, the flicker of fear in his eyes giving way to something else, something like hope. And yet there was a tension there too, the weight of centuries pressing down. Minutes passed. Lysander's pulse, so faint moments ago, began to strengthen. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the color returned to his cheeks. He breathed deeply, the shiver leaving his body. Alara felt a surge of hope, but she did not relax. She could sense the lingering darkness, the curse's presence like a cold wind at the edge of a fire. This was not over. Kaelin stepped closer, his eyes intense. "You've awakened something in me I thought long dead," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "I do not know what to make of it." Alara looked up at him, meeting his gaze. There was danger there, power, history, but also something else. Something fragile, like trust taking root where it had never grown before. Lysander reached for her hand again, and she squeezed it gently. He was alive. For now, he was safe. But she knew, deep in her heart, that the storm had only just begun. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city in silver light. Inside the diner, a small miracle had occurred, a boy saved, a curse hinted at, and two lives bound together in ways neither could yet understand. Alara stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "We'll face it," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Kalen's gaze followed her, intense and unreadable. "Together," he echoed, almost reluctantly, yet with a weight that made her shiver. The night deepened, and the city hummed with life, unaware of the fragile pulse beating in the small diner. But for Alara, Kalen, and Lysander, nothing would ever be the same. The silent pulse of fate had begun its rhythm, and the first threads of a story dark, dangerous, and beautiful had been woven. The city seemed quieter now, as though the rain had washed away the usual hum of life. But inside the diner, the atmosphere remained charged. Alara had barely slept, thinking of Lysander and the shadow that hovered over him. Even though the boy had been stabilized, she felt it in her bones. The curse was not gone. It was waiting, patient and relentless. Kalen had insisted she come with them, though he said nothing about why. They left the diner in silence, stepping into his black, polished carriage. The streets glimmered with wet reflections as the horses' hooves struck the cobblestones. Alara watched the city blur past, her thoughts a tangle of worry and curiosity. The carriage soon left the familiar city streets behind, winding into hills that disappeared into mist. Trees stretched tall and skeletal against the night sky. Shadows seemed to move with intent, and Alara felt eyes watching her from the darkness. She did not speak. Kalen's presence beside her was silent but commanding, a weight she could feel without seeing. Eventually, they reached a castle perched atop a cliff. Its towers pierced the clouds, and its walls were black as obsidian, shining faintly in the pale moonlight. The gates opened as if expecting them, revealing a courtyard lined with statues whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. "This is," Alara began, but Kalen's hand rose slightly. "Do not speak yet, observe first." She obeyed, feeling the hum of something ancient in the air. Magic, old and heavy, flowed through the stones, through the arches, through the very air she breathed. Lysander clutched Kalen's hand, trembling slightly, though his pulse had returned to a normal rhythm. Kalen led them inside, to a hall that smelled of old wood and candle wax. Tapestries depicted battles and ceremonies long past. Each figure seemed to carry its own life, its own story. Alara felt dwarfed, like a small bird in the presence of giants. He finally stopped in front of a smaller chamber at the end of the hall. The walls were lined with books, jars, and bottles filled with strange herbs and powders. The air was warmer here, but heavy with the scent of something she could not name, something alive. "This is where Lysander will stay for now," Kalen said, placing the boy on a bed that looked too large for him. "I have tried every method I know, every spell, every precaution, yet the curse remains. It is stronger than I feared." Alara knelt beside Lysander again. His small hand reached for hers. "We'll find a way," she said softly. "I promise, but I need to understand it." Kalen's eyes met hers. For a moment they were both silent, two strangers bound by necessity and the delicate thread of trust. There was an unspoken question between them, and neither dared to answer it aloud. "The curse," Kalen said finally, his voice low, "is not just on him. It is on our bloodline. My family has carried it for centuries. It awakens when our line is threatened or when our magic is misused. I thought I had controlled it. I was wrong." Alara's heart tightened. "What does it do?" Kalen glanced at the boy, whose breathing was calm for now. "It consumes. It can twist life into darkness if left unchecked, and no human doctor can see it, understand it, or stop it. Only one with insight into the supernatural, like you, can even notice its presence before it's too late." Alara felt a chill run through her. She had always known she saw things others could not, but she had never faced a curse of this magnitude, a life hanging between shadows and light, between death and survival. "I will help him," she said firmly. I need to know more, but I will not let him suffer. Kalen's gaze softened, though the intensity never left his eyes. I trust you, Alara, but understand this, curing him may require more than herbs or intuition. It may demand risk. My world is dangerous for mortals. Alara swallowed hard, feeling the truth in his words. She had already stepped into danger by saving Lysander once, and now she would go further, into a world where power and magic were entwined, where shadows were alive and the line between ally and enemy could vanish in an instant. Days passed in a strange rhythm. Alara watched over Lysander, administering her remedies, whispering encouragement, and learning the subtle signs of the curse's influence. Sometimes it came as trembling in his hands, sometimes as a shadow in his eyes. Other times it was almost imperceptible, a faint aura she could feel more than see. Kalen observed her constantly, often silent, sometimes asking questions she could barely answer. "How do you know?" he asked once, after she adjusted Lysander's blanket. "How do you know what to do?" Alara hesitated. I just see it. I notice what others don't. My grandmother, she taught me to trust that, to notice small things, to notice life where others only see death. Kalen's eyes narrowed, a mixture of curiosity and something harder to name. "You are different from other humans," he said. "I should be wary of you, yet I am drawn to your certainty. It unsettles me." Alara flushed slightly but did not look away. "And I am wary of you. But I am drawn to your son. He needs me." Kalen studied her, and for a moment he seemed older, wearier, as though centuries of solitude pressed down on him. Then, as if the weight of the world could not be carried alone, he turned away. One night, as the moon rose high over the castle, Alara awoke to a whisper of movement. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and Lysander murmured in his sleep. She rose to check on him, feeling a strange pull in the air. Something stirred, a shadow moving at the edge of her vision. Before she could react, a figure appeared in the doorway of Lysander's chamber. It was tall, cloaked in black, and silent as the grave. Alara froze, every instinct screaming danger. Kalen appeared behind her in an instant, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a dagger at his belt. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is not your fight." The figure stepped closer, and Alara saw the flash of a face she did not recognize, pale and sharp, like the reflection of moonlight on ice. Kalen's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Alara saw a flicker of something other than authority, fear. "Who are you?" Kalen demanded. The figure spoke softly, a voice like wind over stone. "The bloodline calls me. The curse awakens. The boy is not yet ready." Alara's pulse quickened. She looked at Lysander, who stirred but did not wake. His small chest rose and fell gently, but she could sense the tension in the air, the invisible thread connecting him to the stranger. Kalen's hands tightened on his dagger. "He is under my protection. You will not touch him." The figure tilted its head, almost as if amused. "Protection is not enough. The boy's fate is tied to forces older than your pride, Kalen. You cannot control them." Alara felt a shiver run through her. There was truth in the words, though she could not understand it fully. She reached for Lysander's hand, her heart hammering. She would not let anyone harm him. Not now, not ever. The figure moved closer, and for a heartbeat it seemed as if the air itself had thickened, heavy with power. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of iron and stone. Kalen lowered his dagger slowly, his expression dark. "The curse knows we are here," he said, "and now it tests us." Alara swallowed hard. "What does it want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Control," Kalen said, his voice quiet but firm. "It wants the boy. And it will not stop until it has him, or we find a way to break it." For the first time, Alara realized the full weight of what she had stepped into. Lysander's life was fragile, and the forces surrounding him were ancient and merciless. And yet, she felt a strange certainty. She had saved him once. She could save him again. Kalen's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "You've become more than a helper, Alara," he said softly. "You are a part of this now, and the risks will not be small." Alara nodded, her resolve hardening. "I know," she said. "But I cannot turn away, not from him." Kalen's expression softened for a brief moment, a flicker of something long buried, hope perhaps, or trust. "Then we will face this together," he said. That night, as Alara watched over Lysander, she felt the presence of something waiting, something that would challenge all they knew, test their courage, and force them to confront darkness within and without. The castle, the curse, the shadows, they were all pieces of a story far larger than she had imagined. And in the distance, beyond the walls, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying a warning. The past was alive, and it would not let the future be free. The castle slept under the pale moonlight, its towers casting long shadows across the misty courtyard. Inside, Alara moved quietly, carrying a tray of herbal teas and remedies for Lysander. The boy was resting now, but she could feel the lingering pulse of the curse, an invisible weight pressing down on the room, heavy as stone. Kalen watched her from the doorway. His dark eyes reflected both caution and curiosity. For the past few days, he had observed her work tirelessly, her presence in the castle a mixture of fascination and unease for him. He had lived centuries with power, with control, with shadows that bent to his will. Yet this mortal woman, so brave, so certain, challenged his understanding of strength. "You cannot fight the curse alone," he said softly, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "It is older than both of us." Alara glanced at him, her hand steady as she placed the tray beside Lysander. "I know," she replied. "That is why I need your help, but we have to face it together, not just with power, with understanding too." Kalen's jaw tightened. "Understanding is rare. Most mortals cannot comprehend what we endure." "I am not like most mortals," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I have seen things, felt things. I know when life is slipping away, and I will not let him lose it." Kalen studied her, an emotion flickering in his eyes he did not want to name. Admiration, yes, but something more dangerous, something like hope. He turned away, hiding it behind the mask of authority he had worn for centuries. Days passed, and their routine became a careful dance. Alara monitored Lysander, adjusting herbs, speaking soft words of encouragement, and observing every flicker of shadow that threatened him. Kalen researched the curse, poring over ancient tomes in the castle library, searching for a solution. They were two halves of a whole, human intuition and vampire knowledge, working side by side against a force neither could fully control. One night, as the wind howled against the castle walls, Alara sat beside Lysander, holding his small hand. His pulse was steady now, but she could feel it trembling beneath her fingers, the curse probing, testing. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. Lysander's eyes fluttered open. "Yes," he said softly, his voice weak but clear. It's inside me." Alara nodded, pressing her hand gently to his chest. "We will fight it together." Before she could speak further, a soft, almost melodic voice echoed in the chamber. "Do you think you can contain it?" Alara froze. The voice was not human, not entirely. Kalen stepped beside her, his presence solid and protective. "Show yourself," he demanded. A figure emerged from the shadows. Pale, with hair like silver moonlight and eyes that glimmered like frost, it floated as if carried by the wind itself. Its presence made the air heavy, almost shimmering with power. "You cannot save him without cost," the figure said. "The boy's blood is tied to the darkness. You meddle in forces beyond your understanding." Alara felt fear tighten in her chest, but she stood her ground. "I understand more than you think, and I will not let him fall." Kalen's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "Be careful," he warned. "This is not a mortal struggle. It is life and death on a scale you cannot yet see." The figure studied them, tilting its head. Then, with a motion like smoke, it vanished, leaving only a faint chill behind. Alara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the encounter. "He's testing us," she said. Seeing if we are worthy. Kalen nodded, his dark eyes unreadable. It does not forgive mistakes. The next morning, Kalen led Alara to the castle's secret chambers, a room filled with ancient symbols carved into stone, glowing faintly under the light of enchanted candles. Lysander lay in the center, his small body surrounded by protective wards. "This is where we attempt the ritual," Kalen explained. "It is dangerous. If done incorrectly, it could consume him or us." Alara swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Then we must be precise. Every word, every movement counts." Kalen studied her intently. "Do you understand the risk?" "I do," she said firmly, "and I accept it for him." The ritual began under the pale light of the moon. Alara and Kalen worked together, her hands guiding Lysander's pulse, his energy, while Kalen chanted words older than memory, calling on powers that bent time and shadow. The room seemed to pulse with life itself, shadows twisting and stretching toward them. Lysander shivered violently, his body trembling under the pressure of the curse's awakening. Alara held his hand tightly, whispering encouragements, feeling her own heartbeat sync with his. Kalen's voice rose, commanding the shadows, bending them to the wards. Yet even his power strained under the weight of the curse. For the first time he realized that his centuries of control were not enough. Alara's intuition guided him. "Not force," she urged. "Balance, calm him, not fight him." Kalen hesitated but followed her instructions, adjusting his spell, letting her guidance shape the flow of magic. Slowly, Lysander's body relaxed, his pulse steadying under their combined effort. And then, without warning, the curse struck with full force. Shadows erupted around them, twisting into forms that threatened to consume the room. Alara felt the weight of them pressing on her chest, cold and sharp, trying to pull her away from Lysander. Kalen stepped forward, placing himself between her and the shadows, his power flaring like a storm. "Do not let go," he shouted. "Hold him." Alara pressed herself closer to Lysander, her hands steadying his pulse, her heart pounding with determination. She could feel the energy of life and death swirling around them, a veil between worlds stretching thin. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat beaded on Kalen's forehead, his muscles taut with strain. Alara's arms ached, but she did not release Lysander. Slowly, painstakingly, the shadows began to recede, folding back into the darkness from which they came. The ritual ended as dawn broke over the horizon. Light spilled into the chamber, touching the walls and casting long, gentle beams across the floor. Lysander stirred, blinking up at Alara with a fragile smile. "You saved me," he whispered. Alara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We saved you," she corrected gently. Kalen lowered himself to sit beside them, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. For a long moment they were silent, bound together by the intensity of what had just passed. And then Kalen spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "I have lived centuries thinking I was beyond fear, beyond hope. But tonight, you have shown me something I had forgotten." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, searching for understanding. "What do you mean?" Kalen's eyes met hers, dark and deep. "That even in darkness there is trust, even in shadow there is life, and even in me there is something worth protecting." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile but undeniable connection forming between them. She had seen his vulnerability, felt it in the quiet moments between their words, and now it was laid bare before her. But even as relief settled over them, a faint whisper reached Alara's ears, a sound of movement in the hall outside, soft but deliberate. Her pulse quickened. "The shadows are not gone," she said softly, rising. "Something is still out there." Kalen's hand gripped hers, a firm reminder of the bond forged in the night's struggle. "Then we face it together," he said. Alara nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She had come this far, risking everything for Lysander. She would not turn back now. Outside the chamber, the castle seemed alive with whispers. The curse had been challenged, but it had not been defeated. Somewhere in the shadows, a presence waited, patient and watchful, ready to strike again. And as the first rays of dawn touched the towers, Alara understood the truth. The veil between life and death was thin, and the bond she shared with Kalen and Lysander had drawn her into a story far larger than she had imagined. They had survived the night, but the war was only beginning. The first light of dawn spilled over the castle, brushing the towers with gold and silver. The night had been long and exhausting, and yet, within the walls of the ancient fortress, a fragile calm had settled. Alara sat beside Lysander, brushing his hair gently as he slept. The boy's chest rose and fell evenly, the curse held at bay for now. Kalen stood near the window, his dark eyes watching the horizon. He was silent as always, yet the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. For centuries he had controlled everything, the shadows, the powers, the threats to his family. But tonight had shown him that control alone was not enough. It was trust, courage, and connection that had saved his son. And it had opened a door in his heart he thought long sealed. "Alara," he said finally, his voice low and measured, "the curse is still out there. We cannot assume it is gone." She looked up, her expression steady. "I know, but Lysander is safe for now. That is what matters. And we can be ready for whatever comes next." Kalen's gaze softened, and for a moment he allowed himself to simply observe her, this mortal woman who had stepped into a world of shadows and magic, who had risked everything without hesitation. There was something in her courage that unsettled him and yet inspired him, a reminder that life, even in darkness, could carry hope. Lysander stirred and opened his eyes, blinking against the sunlight. "Morning," he said softly. He smiled at Alara and she returned it, squeezing his small hand gently. "You're safe," she whispered. "You fought well." He nodded, still fragile but stronger than he had been in days. "Thanks to you," he murmured. Kalen moved closer, placing a protective hand on Lysander's shoulder. "Your strength is remarkable, my son, but never forget, you are part of something bigger now. The shadows will test you again, and you must be ready." Lysander looked at him, eyes wide but trusting. "I will," he said. Alara rose, brushing herself off. "Kalen, we need a plan," she said. "The curse may be weakened, but it is not gone. We cannot wait for it to strike again." Kalen nodded, his dark eyes reflecting both concern and determination. "You are right. We will need knowledge, preparation, and perhaps alliances. Forces in the shadows know of us now. They will not wait." For hours they worked together, poring over ancient texts, tracing lines of power, and discussing ways to protect Lysander without invoking dangerous magic that could consume him. Alara's intuition guided Kalen, suggesting methods that bridged the gap between mortal understanding and vampire power. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the library floor. Kalen finally leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You are extraordinary, Alara. You see what others cannot, and you act when others hesitate. I am grateful for you." Alara met his gaze, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not expected. "I do what I must, for him, for Lysander, and I trust you." Kalen's eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself a small smile. Trust is dangerous, yet perhaps it is also necessary. They continued their work through the day and into the evening. The castle, vast and ancient, seemed to breathe around them, its walls holding centuries of secrets and power. Alara felt the presence of life and shadow intertwining, the world outside both distant and threatening. As night fell, they prepared for another protective ritual, one designed to shield Lysander permanently, or at least long enough to break the curse fully. The chamber was lit with candles, their light flickering across the carved stones. Lysander lay in the center, his small form calm but tense. "Alara," Kalen said softly, kneeling beside her, "this will demand all your strength. The veil between life and death will thin again. You must be ready to face it." "I am ready," she said firmly. Her hands hovered over Lysander's chest, feeling the steady pulse beneath her fingertips. "We will do this together." Kalen began the incantation, his voice strong, resonant, calling on powers older than memory. Shadows moved at the edges of the chamber, curling and twisting like living things. Alara followed her intuition, guiding Lysander's pulse, steadying the energy that threatened to spill out of control. The ritual intensified. Shadows lashed at them, testing their strength and resolve. Lysander shivered, his small body tense, yet Alara's hands never wavered. She whispered encouragements, letting her presence anchor him, letting her belief in life push back against the darkness. Kalen's voice rose, bending the shadows, shaping them, but even his power struggled. "Alara, now!" he shouted. She pressed both hands to Lysander's chest, closing her eyes, letting her energy flow into him. Her heartbeat synced with his, and for a moment she felt the veil thin entirely, the darkness brushing against their souls. Fear rose like a tide, but she did not let go. She would not fail him. Minutes passed, each one stretched by the weight of power and shadow. Then slowly the darkness began to recede. Shadows collapsed into themselves, curling into nothingness. Lysander's chest rose and fell evenly, his pulse steady. The room was quiet, save for the soft flicker of candlelight. Alara opened her eyes, relief washing over her. Lysander smiled weakly, his trust shining through his tired eyes. "I feel better," he whispered. Kalen exhaled, lowering himself beside them. "It is done," he said, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "The curse, it has been weakened, perhaps even broken." Alara looked at him, her heart full of both pride and relief. "We did it, together." For a long moment they sat in silence, three souls bound by courage, trust, and shared struggle. And for the first time, Kalen allowed himself to truly see Alara, not just as a mortal, not just as a savior, but as someone who had entered his life and changed it irrevocably. The first light of dawn broke fully, spilling over the towers and bathing the chamber in gold. Shadows lingered, but they were weaker now, pushed back by the courage and connection of those who dared to defy them. Kalen reached for Alara's hand, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "You have shown me something I thought I had lost long ago," he said. "Hope, trust, even love." Alara's breath caught. I feel the same," she admitted softly. "I never imagined I would find this here in a world so dark, yet somehow I did." Kalen's eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself a smile that was not measured, not guarded. "Then we must protect it," he said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside, the castle walls glimmered in the morning light. The curse had been challenged, the shadows pushed back, and the boy's life had been secured, for now. Yet even as relief settled over them, a faint whisper in the wind carried a warning. The forces that had haunted their lives were not defeated. They were only waiting, patient and watchful. Alara rose, brushing the hair from Lysander's forehead. "We will be ready," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." Kalen nodded, placing a protective hand over her own. The bond between them, forged in the shadows and strengthened by courage, was now undeniable. They were partners in life, in struggle, and in something deeper, a connection that neither time nor darkness could easily sever. Lysander stirred, smiling at both of them. "I feel safe," he said softly. "You are safe," Alara replied, holding his small hand. "And we will keep you safe, always." Kalen watched them, a mixture of pride and longing in his eyes. He had once believed that immortality demanded solitude and control, that attachment was weakness. But now he knew that strength could come from connection, that even the darkest night could be illuminated by trust and courage. The castle stirred around them, alive with shadows and history. The night's trials had passed, but the story was far from over. Yet for the first time, Alara, Kalen, and Lysander stood together, ready to face whatever darkness might come, armed with courage, love, and the unbreakable bonds they had forged. And as the sun rose fully, painting the world in gold and silver, a new day began, not just for Lysander but for all three of them. The curse had been challenged, The shadows had been met, and their lives, forever intertwined, held the promise of hope, redemption, and transformation. For Alara, the girl who had noticed the unseen, the boy who had survived the darkness, and the vampire lord who had learned to trust, the dawn was not only the end of a long night, it was the beginning of a story that would continue, luminous even in the shadows.